They insisted, the researchers from the public sector, because Oxford is a state school. I always remind my friends at Harvard and Yale that Oxford and Cambridge are state schools. They insisted, if you want to collaborate with us, and they did because there was great research at Oxford, we need to make sure we're sharing the knowledge, and we'll join the patent pool, and we'll keep costs and prices low, because the mission is not just stuff, outputs, it's the outcome. So this is what I will talk about today. How can we get a good partnership that's outcomes-oriented? By the way, tell the hotel that as soon as you check in, you should get a water bottle. No more plastic. If you go to Rwanda, outcome, plastic-free country. And I always bring my bottle. And it's not just this hotel, every hotel. And I was just in the Amazon, by the way, where they don't recycle the plastic bottles, and they're full of plastic bottles. Anyway, people from the 1970s have been talking about recycling plastic. So it's not true that we're at the frontier. We're actually going backwards in many ways. So what does it mean to be mission-oriented? First of all, it means to be proactive. Of course, there'll be crises and crises and crises, and you didn't mention one crisis, Ricardo, the AI bubble. There is about to be, and some of us have predicted this for quite a long time. I don't have time to talk about it. Happy to talk about it later. But a big wave that's also coming our way is another financial crisis. I don't mean to scare you, but if you do have stocks in NVIDIA, check it out soon. But the fact that these crises exist, that's not really the issue, is why are we so reactive to these crises? And even when we know, and we do know that the cost of inaction, el costo de hacer nada, is higher than the cost of action, we still do not act with the urgency that the science is telling us. In fact, many scientists say it's almost too late. We've gone beyond the tipping point. But I'm an optimist like Ricardo. It's never too late to act. But it's actually quite incredible that even during COVID, we didn't use it as an opportunity to design better partnerships and make sure that the companies benefiting from public handouts, because there was lots of handouts in COVID, were better companies, treating workers better, but also reducing carbon emissions. In the UK, for example, we gave £600 million to EasyJet, an OK airline, no conditions attached. Some other countries, by the way, didn't do that. France, all the money that went to Renault and Air France during COVID was conditional that these companies reduce their carbon emissions in their next 5 years. They received the support right away. Of course, they had a cash flow problem. Now, they need the support now, but not in a parasitic way, in a symbiotic way. There was a good deal, like that AstraZeneca deal that I mentioned. And COVID, again, we should have woken up. We didn't. Do you think the Dominican Republic today, or the US, or the UK, or Italy, or Brazil, are better prepared today than they were when COVID began? Did we invest in global health systems? Imagine if COVID began in Africa and not in China, we all would have been worse off. Are African health systems really strong today? So when the permafrost melts, which the scientists say is happening, and new viruses come out, which the scientists are saying is happening, are we ready with stronger health systems? Have we invested in the public sector brain so we don't need to give Deloitte the contracts for test and trace, which we need? Test and trace, I don't know how you called that here, but you remember there was an infodemic, no? Side of the pandemic, and we found that many countries at the city level, at the regional level, at the national level didn't have that kind of digital savviness of knowing how to actually communicate properly and quickly with people. And the test and trace system in many countries was weak. And also, have we invested in the so-called essential workers? It was so condescending. I don't know here, but in London, where I live, we clapped the health workers. We said, yay, we had our pans. We called them essential. When COVID was done, they were all in the streets striking in huelga because they continued to be undervalued, underpaid in the system itself, even in the global north, let alone in the so-called global south, continues to be weak. So, this is a choice. There's nothing inevitable. You say not to be pessimistic. I say let's actually be very serious where the problems are and admit that it's an outcome. of what we have done. There is nothing deterministic. It's not God. It's not the Martians. It's not even the market. The market is an outcome of how we choose to design our economies. And yes, we all know, you're so right, Ricardo, we know the problems, but the problems, we should also talk about them. These problems that you see here, which is the usual list of weaknesses in many Latin American economies, I must say Italy has almost all of these as well, so I'll come back to Italy later, because many problems, I think, in Latin America were brought over by the Italians, definitely in Argentina. Except in Brazil. The only reason the language in Brazil is beautiful, unlike Portuguese in Portugal, which I think sounds Russian, no, is when the Italians came, they opened the luggage and there was vowels, no? Anyway, so yes, we have all these, but why? Why do we have low productivity in some companies and some sectors? In the UK, for example, we have low productivity, but also low investment. Productivity is an outcome of investment. And if you do have, in some companies, rent-seeking, and they are themselves not reinvesting their profits back into the system, this also lowers productivity. So instead of just listing them, we should also ask why that is. Or we often see tables, no? Low investment in research and development, and so on. But that's a choice. The market has not chosen that, or the government has not necessarily chosen that. These are public and private investments in research and development and in education or training of the workforce that are often too low. And so, yes, we have to look at all the amazing examples also of entrepreneurship, of innovation, and Latin America has plenty. But the real question is, how do we go beyond just examples, and how do we have transformative change? How can we make sure that the different projects, and I love, Ricardo, when you said the portfolio approach, because that's absolutely how we should think about investment, outcomes-oriented investment, not putting all our eggs in one basket. But how do we also move away from projects towards programs which are transformational, and again, the sum is bigger than the parts, and definitely, of course, as you mentioned, we need regional integration, and it's incredible how little of that we have in Latin America, compared even to Africa, by the way. And CAF, the kind of local and IDB development banks, are actually less ambitious, I would say, than the African Development Bank and some of these more regional units in Latin America. But what I want to do is to say, how do we go beyond not only the complaints and be positive, but how do we actually make sure that this notion of outcomes and missions really transforms the ideology, which I think is one of the biggest bottlenecks. I often joke that I come in as an economist and I come out as a therapist, because the ideology, and sorry, this is my commercial break, buy the books, the ideology of one side simply de-risking the other, or one side just needing the right rules of the game, the horizontal conditions, then get the hell out of the way. One side enabling, facilitating the other. This is part of the problem. It is impossible to have an innovation-led economy, inclusive economy, sustainable economy with the ideology that the private sector creates wealth, the private sector creates value, and at best, at worst, get out of the way, at best, the public sector is there to correct a market failure.
Asiento allí.